All right, welcome everyone to SQL Friday. This is SQL Friday number 105, and our star today is, I think it's Roni, or is it Roni? Roni?
Yeah.
Roni Vered, who is joining us from Amsterdam. And Roni is going to talk about implementing SQL Server workloads on AWS Cloud, which is kind of a new thing for SQL Friday because I think all the cloud related sessions we have had so far has been on Azure. So now it's, I don't know if we should call it a competitor or a complementary cloud. It's another cloud, and Ronnie is going to talk us through the different ways we can run SQL Server on AWS. So welcome, Ronnie. It's your first time on SQL Friday, so I'm especially happy to have you as a guest. The stage is going to be all yours. If you have questions, by the way, people, write them in the chat and we will handle questions after the actual presentation.
Alrighty. So, thank you, Magnus, for allowing me the stage and having me here. I'm very excited to be here and to join this nice initiative about free education about SQL Server deployments in general. My name is Roni Vered. I'm a senior database specialist solution architect in AWS, as mentioned, based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And I'm here to tell you about how to deploy and implement SQL Server on the AWS cloud. So I did notice for a long while that having deployment of SQL Server on AWS is kind of underrepresented in terms of public knowledge, public sessions, etc. So this is in a way my small contribution to spreading the knowledge and the care, because I have been working with SQL Server on AWS for quite some time, and it's a definitely valuable candidate for hosting SQL Server workloads. And I think it is worth to know also those things, because it's a very big cloud provider, and you might eventually have the opportunity or the ability to actually deploy those. So there's nothing bad of learning how it's going to be and on that cloud provider. So before I begin, a little bit about myself. So I've been working with databases in general since 2006. I actually started as an Oracle DBA in the beginning, and originally I come from Israel. But ever since 2012, I migrated into the Netherlands. And while I migrated, I also shifted into being a kind of SQL Server only person. And ever since then, I've worked in various of roles, from BI DB consultant, BI developer, and a lot of production DBA in my past. And pretty much since around COVID, where I searched for something else and something new to do, I ran across this opportunity of being a solution architect, which is database specialist. And I thought, okay, it can be interesting to try something new and different. So ever since then, I'm working here with AWS. I can tell you it's very challenging and interesting, and I was very pleasantly surprised to see a very large group of very professional individuals that knows the ins and outs of SQL Server, and it's very uh, inspiring and uplifting to be around a lot of very talented people that are working in our domain. What are we going to talk about during this session? So first of all, we'll talk briefly and say why SQL Server on AWS and what are the advantages of it. Then we will start to list all the options that we have for deployment. And we'll talk briefly also about selecting the right instance and storage, because it is not that well known. And I thought it would be worth to articulate and highlight some of the terms and configurations of how to actually choose the right instances and storage in the cloud, just to give you a little bit names, configurations, and some concepts that you might be able to use in the future, a little bit about how to get started, and we will finish with a round of Q&A. I encourage you that if you have any questions, in order for you not to forget, so just like Magnus says, please do list them in the chat room, and we will try to address all of them at the end. Okay, so without further ado, let's dive in. So as far as I understood, and I tried to get around and understand what is the audience that I'm talking to, and I kind of have the notion that we're talking about with technical people. So this is the only, in a way, marketing slide that we have in our deck. And out of all these nice marketing terms, I just wanted to focus in only one particular aspect, which is the broadest and deepest capabilities. So even though AWS, SQL Server on AWS is kind of underrepresented in terms of public sessions or widely known in conferences, on data platform conferences, we have over a decade of experience of running Microsoft workloads in general and SQL Server on AWS. RDS for SQL Server, which is the managed service for SQL Server, was created in May 2012. So it means that we have over a decade of experience of running SQL Server workloads in various of sizes and shapes, in various of verticals of customer types, and we gathered a pretty handful experience on helping those customers to deploy their environments. So even though it is not that widely talked about, internally within AWS, there's a lot of good people that can help you and create, deploy, and implement those workloads and help you out with running your existing environments on the AWS cloud. So what are the options that we're having? So first of all, foremost, we can begin with something that you most likely will be familiar with, and that is the self-managed SQL Server on EC2. EC2 is our virtual machine that can be provided within AWS, and on top of that virtual machine, you can simply install the SQL Server. You have full control. You have all the database engines and additions at your disposal. It will be very, very similar to any virtual on-prem environment that you already know, because the only difference that will be is that the VM is being provided on AWS on your behalf instead of running your own virtualization system, such as VMware, for example. It will be exactly the same look and feel, self-managed patching, high availability. You will create it and construct it yourself. You could create, install, update any third parties or any other configuration that is customized at your disposal. So it will be a very, very similar look and feel, just like you're having now. The second options, which is right on the other spectrum of the scale, is RDS for SQL Server. RDS stands for Relational Database Service, and it is umbrella service for all database engines that are relational that we provide for you in the AWS cloud. This session is mainly talking about RDS for SQL Server, but on the same umbrella we have Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, and MariaDB. So a lot of database engines that are being covered by the same umbrella service. But what is the difference? We're going to talk a lot about the differences and some of the functionality, but in a very, very nutshell, it is very, very well framed in order to give you a managed experience to take away some of the burden of administration tasks like provisioning, monitoring, backup, restore, patching. You have high availability at the click of the button, but on the other side of the remote, with a managed service, comes some limitations that goes hand in hand. So unlike with the SQL Server on EC2, you will not have the ability to RDP to the server, to the underlying server. You will not have the ability to have, for example, sysadmin server role at your disposal, and you will not have the ability to have a full access on the SQL Server instance and the underlying host. We did manage already to know that we have numerous of customers that are able to deploy their services on the managed services, and they're extremely happy about it, despite some of the limitations that we will discuss further on in the consecutive slides. Another flavor that is right in the middle, it's called RDS Custom for SQL Server. So what is the difference within? Again, we're going to tell a little bit more about it in the consecutive slides, but in a nutshell, it provides you a same managed experience. So a lot of those managed activities are still happening on AWS on your behalf, but it provides you a little bit more flexibility. You have access to the underlying OS and instance. You have the ability to install third parties, full control on the server, and sysadmin server role at your disposal. But at the moment, you still have to maintain your own high availability, and you have some other limitations that you have to take into consideration. So these three options are kind of the full spectrum of options that we are allowed to give the customers in order to be able to try to accommodate as most use cases as possible and to adhere to all the requirements of the customers that we have. So we will start to talk a little bit more deeply in three of those options. So first of foremost is rehosting your workloads into self-managed SQL Server on EC2. I won't elaborate a lot about this option because it would be a very, very similar look and feel as you have now on your on-premises environment. We can offer you this self-managed SQL Server on EC2 on Windows or Linux system. Amazon will provide you images that have those for you, and they are continuously updated with the latest cumulative updates as part as the lifecycle releases of Microsoft as the vendor of SQL Server. It's not a Microsoft licensing session, so we won't talk in length over this topic, but I just wanted to highlight some of the available options that you can choose from when you're deploying SQL Server on AWS. So first and foremost, you can buy license-included instances from AWS for Windows Server and SQL Server, and this is relevant for all the options, RDS Custom, and EC2. This will be based on pay-as-you-go license model, in which, for example, you can turn off your servers, which is relevant for RDS and EC2, and not pay for this licensing time. The other options, which is also very popular, is BYOL, bring your own licenses. If you already purchased Microsoft licenses, you can bring them those licenses onto AWS in specific terms. So first of all, if you have active software assurance for the Microsoft software, you can take advantage of license mobility and move those licenses over to AWS. It's relevant for products like SQL Server, Microsoft SharePoint, and more. If you don't have software assurance, Amazon EC2 dedicated host and EC2 dedicated instances give you the access to hardware that is fully dedicated for your use, and this will allow you to use your own licensed Microsoft software. So if you have further questions on the topic, please contact me offline for further discussion. As mentioned, I'm not a licensed specialist, but this is a very, very widely, commonly asked topic about it. I did mention that it's an option to deploy SQL Server on EC2 over Linux, and it's getting more and more popular as customers realizing that it's possible to run a SQL Server on Linux, and they want to enjoy the cost benefits and the cost reductions of not paying the licenses for Windows Server. We are supporting it and we're providing it in a handful of OS choices and different Linux distributions. Yet, however, it's very important to understand, and we are talking with customers when we are considering these kind of options about the fact that the SQL Server on Linux comes with a handful of limitations and services that are not supported onto that platform. So we are always making sure that we will not run into some of those limitations on the customers. Briefly, when we're talking to customers, and I have a very nice slide that summarizes all of those options a little bit into the end, but we are always talking backwards from customers. So whenever we're having a conversation with customers, we are checking their requirements. We are verifying what do they need and what is important for them in order to assess what will be the right fit. So if they are open for moving to manage, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next slides, then we are starting to evaluate those options. But if it is not an option, there is no problem in deploying SQL Server on EC2, and it comes with all the added advantages, the fact that you are the full ownership of the machine. We have many customers that are choosing SQL on EC2 mainly due to the BYL option, which is not at the moment applicable for RDS. So you can't bring your own licenses for the managed service of RDS for SQL Server. But having SQL Server on EC2 comes with more responsibility that is employed on you as a customer because as you are owner of the machine, you have, for example, have to manage the high availability yourself, and there are some other implications in terms of administration overhead of the daily tasks that every DBA or database professional knows that it's part of their job. The second option that we're talking about is re-platform SQL Server on AWS. And this we're going to talk about the two managed services that we have, which is RDS for SQL Server and RDS Custom for SQL Server. So Amazon Relational Database Service for SQL Server, it's a fully managed service. It provides you a lot of automation that you can use and deploy from AWS on your behalf, which will simply relieve you from all of those administration tasks. Provisioning, patching, backup, and recovery, all those things are fully covered with the managed service suite. It is a license included model, as mentioned, pay as you go. So we have a lot of customers, for examples, that, for example, for their testing environments or acceptance environments, they are just shutting down the servers either outside of office hours or during the weekend, and it's possible for them to reduce their cost duringly. Also, RDS comes with an integrated high availability options, which is called RDS Multi-AZ. Multi-AZ stands for Multi-Availability Zone. Each availability zone acts within a region, geographical region, acts as a separate data center, which have a very, very low one digit millisecond latency between them, and we are creating with an automation a high availability solution between a primary and a secondary on your behalf. In addition to that, we're also providing you a handful of options to have a reader capabilities by giving you up to 5 in or cross region read replicas to redirect your reading workloads onto a different host in order to reduce the load on production. In addition, because under the hood, it's the exact same SQL Server as you know and love, then the migration will be a very, very easy one. You can almost employ the majority of the migration options that SQL Server can provide you. It will be familiar code, features, tools. RDS supports a lot of industry standards, monitoring tools, backup tools. A lot of external vendors are happy to collaborate with AWS and certify their tools in order to work with the RDS framework because everybody are benefiting for it. In addition, naturally, because it will be a homogeneous migrations from your own environments towards the cloud, there will be no schema conversion. It's a simple migrations to and from. When you're trying to evaluate what's the actual difference and why would you like and want to move to the managed solution, we often say that the majority of the work that everyday life of professional database people are doing is happening on the infrastructure scale. And that doesn't bring a lot of value to the actual business. So you have to deal a lot with backups, high availability, patching, maintenance, and so on, which is very important. And it's the bread of butter of every database person or infrastructure persons in general. But you will not get promoted or get extra points for doing a proper patching or backup routine. You will get credit and will get awards for you as a database professional if you're optimizing the application that actually brings value to your business. And that's the application optimization layer. So why not handing off all those non-differentiated tasks and just hand it over to the cloud vendor for them to operate on, which they are pretty good at. And this will let you relieve you the responsibility only to address the application tuning, the deployment orchestrations, etc. So it doesn't mean that you will not do any database related activities onto your server. You will still have the ability and responsibility, for example, to tune your indexes, to do performance tuning of your queries, or create reports or dashboards. All those things still remain. But all those infrastructure related tasks that you do on a daily basis, which are important, are just being handed over from you over to the cloud vendor. So that was RDS for SQL Server. And what is RDS Custom, and why do we have such a similar service that we provide our customers? So we usually say that over 90% of the features and services of AWS derive from customer feedback. And this is a very nice example of such a thing. We talked with a lot of customers that really wanted to move to managed services, but they couldn't due to various of things, due to the limitations of the managed service, due to the fact, for example, that they have a legacy system that mandate the usage of sysadmin. They had a legacy system that had to install binaries onto the host, or other applications like, for example, Microsoft SharePoint that creates some objects on the master system database, which is not accessible within the managed service of RDS. In addition, a lot of customers wanted, for example, to mount more disk drives towards the database in order to, for example, have their backups on it. And in general, to be able to have more flexibility like RDPing the server. So all of these things came for us, and the service team of RDS came and provided this option. So RDS Custom for SQL Server do provide you a very similar managed experience with automation of a lot of tasks that are taking away from your hands. And yet, it provides you a little bit more flexibility and granular level of access for you to be able to deploy a lot of legacy systems. In addition, which is a very popular option and another use case, is the lift and shift option. Many customers told us, yeah, we would be happy to move to the cloud, but we still want to maintain an on-premises environment and just have our DR site on AWS. Will that be possible? Then with RDS Custom, it is, because you can create a construction, for example, like distributed availability groups, and having a cluster on-prem, a cluster on the cloud, and a distributed availability group amongst them in order to enhance and improve your DR strategy of your organization. So all those things are now available at your hands with RDS Custom. This is a little bit diving deep in providing you some of the nuances of what's the difference between RDS and RDS custom. I would say when I'm talking to customers about the requirements and they're assessing their workloads before coming to the cloud, I would say we usually evaluate RDS first, and only when we hit one or more of the limitations that comes in play in regarding to RDS, then we move to evaluate the RDS custom. And that's very natural because RDS is over a decade of a service and RDS custom is relatively new. It was initially published at the last reInvent, the biggest AWS conference in Las Vegas. So we usually operate with RDS first because it provides you a little bit better user experience, have a higher level of managed experience and abilities. But again, if you hit any of those limitations or you are wishing to get a more granular control or ability to add third-party applications on the host, etc., then we can offer the end check with a POC or a general check about RDS custom options. So what we're having here, this slide provides you some sort of a high-level view of the options available of AWS to help you guide and evaluate what will be the right suitable service for your workload deployment. So basing on your business needs and workload requirements, you have the options to pick and choose from the various of the services that we provide. I will not go over on all those bullet points within the slides. Later on, we will provide you the slide deck that you'll be able to have a view on it. But I just wanted to highlight some of those differences within this table. So let's talk first about the database limit. So within the RDS as a managed service, we do provide you the options to have up to 100 databases. And we have some customers that had found this limitation problematic. And therefore, within RDS Custom, it gives you the options to have up to 5,000 databases. The PITR refers to point-in-time restore. Within the ability of the managed service of restoring, at the moment, RDS Custom provides you the ability to do a point-in-time restore only to 100 databases, but it might change in the near future because the service team is working on it. For the SQL Server on EC2, you have up to the native SQL Server editions. Yet, however, we did notice that for many of the customers, the 100 database limit is not the biggest obstacle that comes in their way when they are evaluating their various of options. In terms of high availability, so for SQL Server on EC2, it will be just the same as you have on the on-prem environment. You will be able to install, for example, the Windows clustering onto your machines, and you'll be able to create and deploy either an FCI, a failover cluster, or using always-on availability groups. So you have the two options at your disposal. You could use also mirroring or log shipping or transactional replication. Pretty much any form of SQL Server native capability is at your disposal within that self-managed option. For RDS, the high availability is a fully managed service. It's with a click of the button, you are going to be created either an always-on availability groups configuration between the two availability zone sites or database mirroring. Why is it those two options? Because it's based on the version and edition. So for example, in the later editions, when basic availability groups was established, then also on SQL Server Standard 2019, you'll be able to have basic availability group as a form of high availability. But because we are working backwards and maintaining all the approved live versions of SQL Server, depending on the version of the edition, we are utilizing the relevant high availability options that we can employ and deploy onto your instances. For RDS custom, at the moment, it is still a self-managed. It might change in the future. In terms of version additions, as mentioned, we are adhering to the lifecycle policy of all the approved versions of SQL Server. And that's why, for example, as of July 2022, we made obsolete SQL 2012 because we are always maintaining the approved versions of the vendor. And naturally, on self-managed on EC2, you'll be able to have the ability to install whichever versions you see fit, even if it's not supported already. Because this is a SQL Server focus session, I'm not going to talk about the other options that we can employ onto our RDS environment, or the Amazon Aurora, which is the homegrown cloud-native database solution that we can provide. But I still wanted to highlight it that it's still an option. And the reason for that is that within the Aurora, Amazon Aurora, which is a managed service that comes with two flavors of MySQL and PostgreSQL open source database engines, we see a lot of customers that are opening for modernization and want to break free from the legacy commercial database engines, mainly because of costs, because the open source databases have far less a licensing overhead in terms of costs, but also because it's a very popular, well-maintained, and well progressed kind of database engines to choose from. So Amazon Aurora, as mentioned, comes in those two flavors. And lately, as of last year, we provided an option for customers to use Babelfish for Aurora Postgres. So customers are able to run SQL Server applications on Postgres with little to no code changes. What do I mean by that? Because I was, as a SQL Server person, was a little bit skeptical about that option, but it's essentially having the ability to migrate your data from SQL Server to Aurora Postgres, but keep your application with little to no code changes. So your application still talks T-SQL and still talks SQL Server, but the Babelfish acts as a language extension that enables the Aurora Postgres to understand SQL Server proprietary T-SQL language. What's the purpose of that service? Is essentially to accelerate migrations. So just imagine how difficult it may be to have a modernization and change all your code into a different database vendor. We are all using the same base ANSI code, but each of the database vendor enhance that basic ANSI code with their own proprietary relevant SQL language with different procedures and functions to enhance the different abilities. But the more enhancements that are vendor specific, the more away you are from the ANSI code. And this helps you with that conversion into Postgres. I can tell you that I've been working with several customers already, and we about it, and it's not an easy task. So this doesn't come like super easy and clean. So no one is telling you, hey, let's have a heterogeneous migration with a click of a button. This is a working with the customers and analyzing their code and checking what are his automatic migrations, what will be manual migration. So it's a joint working with AWS and the customers in order to make it happen. But we already have several customers on production with this, and they are very happy, and they dropped instantly their licensing overhead while working with Postgres SQL Server. Postgres instead of SQL Server. Migration options. So how do you do it? How do you migrate So we can tell you, especially if you're having homogeneous migrations from your on-premises environments towards the cloud, you can employ a lot of the native features and capabilities of SQL Server, as you already know. You can use the backup and restore native functionality from T-SQL or PowerShell. You can use a SQL Server transactional replication in order to push the subscriber into RDS or to EC2. You can use log shipping in order to transfer the databases to have a relatively little downtime. Or you can use availability groups or distributed availability groups. And last but not least, you can also employ the Amazon Database Migration Services, which is an AWS service that allows you to perform either a one-off full migration of the database or to have a continuous replication of ongoing changes right up to the cutover moment. And this is very popular for customers that have a very, very low RTO and RPO requirements. So they're having a little bit sensitive for downtime or service interruptions. So this gives you ability to have relatively a very, very low amount of service interruptions for your application. Again, every customer is different. Every customer has different requirements or needs, and we assess everything with the customers based on the requirements while we're having the chats and the conversations about their migrations. So this is a nice, I think it's a nice flow chart that sometimes we use with customers, and I gave here the reference for the blog where it comes from. Well, we talked to the customer about the three options of free hosting, self-managed SQL on EC2, or replatforming, changing to the move to manage into RDS or RDS custom, or the potential of refactoring, modernizing your database into a different database engine, usually based on open source database engine, either full-on heterogeneous migrations to Postgres or MySQL, or with the usage of Babelfish in order to have an easy way or an accelerated method for heterogeneous migrations towards Babelfish. I encourage you to have a look at that blog. It's a very, very informative and elaborates on the various of migration strategy options. Okay, so we talked about all those things, and it was very, very concise and a lot of information. And now we're moving towards something a little bit different. We're talking more about selecting the right instance and storage, how to right size properly, how to pick and choose, and what are the different terms and configurations when we're talking about virtual machines on AWS. So when we are optimizing and right-sizing your workloads and evaluating those against the ones in the cloud, we usually ask, what do you have now? We're getting from customers the existing specs and metrics of your existing environments. We are taking into consideration also the performance metrics information from CPU, memory, and storage. And based on that, we are checking internally and provide you guidance and help of what and pick and choose from the right CPU, memory, network, and storage options that we can employ. I have here a very, very crowded slide. And the truth is that we have over 500 different instance types to pick and choose from. But that particular is intended to kind of direct you to the most relevant types that usually SQL Server customers are using. The ones in yellow will be instance types that RDS for SQL Server supports. But I can tell you that we are usually walking towards the Intel-based EC2 instances, and we are providing guidance and help for the various of people of how to pick and choose the right one. We also have instance types that are very, very much oriented towards SQL Server, which is usually the memory optimized kind of instances, because as you know, SQL Server will take all the memory as he or it can take, as long as you are not capping it with max memory option. We're usually directing the customers for RDS to the R6i family or M6i family. And if you're working with SQL on EC2, we are usually working with X2 family, which is simply the latest edition that we currently have. Usually, we are always advising customers to use the latest edition of the EC2 instances because they are having the best hardware, the latest CPU generation, clock speed, and so on. In terms of storage, how to pick and choose storage. So we have I would say, two main options to pick and choose from. The first one is EBS, Elastic Block Storage, which is essentially the drive that you will attach to the machine. And that comes with various flavors. Or if you have an FCI, failover cluster instance, a shared storage underneath for your existing environment, and you wish to mimic and have it the same like for like on the cloud, we do have the ability to provide that. And those service names are FSX for Windows File Server and FSX for NetApp ONTAP. Again, for both of the options, you have full guidance and help from solution architects that can help you steer and guide and check what will be the right thing to pick and choose from. So when we're talking about the EBS options, which are relatively more popular to choose for standalone servers or cluster environments based on always-on availability groups, you have the following various options to pick and choose from. So many customers are using GP2, general purpose, for their either EC2 or RDS deployment. It comes from 20 gigabytes up to 16 terabytes. This is how RDS, for example, the limitation of it. For EC2, you are able to add more EBS volumes to the machine in order to increase the size. But also, it is not very widely known that it is possible indeed to increase with a private offering the RDS instance for larger size up to 64 terabytes. It does come with some limitations in terms of storage scaling, but it is a very valuable option for customers that have a lot of storage that they wish to employ into the database. If 16,000 IOPS and 1,000 megabytes per second throughput is not enough, we can also go to the other EBS storage type, which is IO1. Both of them are SSD based, but they have different characteristics in terms of IOPS and throughput. Then you can go and reach up to potentially 256 IOPS and 4,000 megabytes per second throughput. Another interesting thing to know is that within the EC2 various of options that we can provide, some of the boxes comes with a dedicated attached SSD drives that is called NVMe that is directly attached to the machine. What it is good for, it is bypassing the network, so it's a direct attachment to the EC2 machine, and this gives you a fast disk I/O, but at the expense of having it not persistent storage. So this is clearly excellent for TempDB workloads, for example, or if we're talking about EC2, buffer pool extension. This is great for this because it is temporary based and not persistent requirements. For RDS, if you pick and choose these two instance type, you have the ability to have an automatic placement of TempDB workloads, that system database, onto that locally attached drive. This is also something that is nice to know. Another very popular thing that people ask us within AWS is, we heard about the agility option that you can change the compute size, you can change the storage size, but what is the service interruption requirements or implications of such a change? So I wanted in this slide to give you a slide overview about that. So first of all, if you want to change an instance type, so either to a different instance type altogether or just a higher or lower from the same family, then it does require a stop-start or a reboot. But if you do have for RDS a multi-AZ deployment, which is a cluster-based environment for high availability, or a self-managed high availability deployment on EC2, you can simply fail over to the other node, perform the change, and potentially fail over back. So the outage will be practically the failover duration for that particular change. In regarding to the storage, it's even lower than that. You can modify allocated storage, the storage type, so you can pick and choose from GP2 or GP3 or IO1, etc., and that or the change the IOPS associated with the machine, and that will come within potentially minutes, and it will have no performance implications onto the server itself. It happens behind the scene. We do still, however, highly recommend customers to perform it not at the peak usage of their workloads, but based on the maintenance window, because it's a general good advice to do in any way. In regarding for the modification options, well, you have at your disposal either to do it manually from the console or to have it automated with the command line interface, an API call, or even a PowerShell commands. We have a lot of dedicated RDS related PowerShell commands that you can pick and choose from. So we are reaching to the pretty much to the end. So finally, I wanted to briefly talk about options of how to migrate the databases. AWS offers a variety of migration tools, programs, and support options. We understand that building the future is a journey. So we are really much incentivized to help the customers to do it in the best offer way. And AWS offers tools and experts to help assess, plan, and build the right path for the workload migrations of your company. We provide you a handful of self-service tool sets that can include, for example, the DMS, Database Migration Service, which I've mentioned already, that can help you provide a homogeneous migrations, so SQL Server to SQL Server, but also potentially also heterogeneous migrations. When you are using the heterogeneous migration options, you need to also use something that is called SCT, a schema conversion tool. And that tool is assessing the source compatibility and recommendations for the target engine. It tries to convert it on your behalf, and if it doesn't able to, it will provide you an output and a very, very elaborative report of what would you need to perform manually in order to make it happen. Besides that, we also offer specialized database programs to offer migration support and expert advice. For example, we have the DMA, Database Migration Acceleration Programs, that provides customers a way to quickly migrate databases at a fixed price, and it leverages technical learnings from Amazon's experience in migrating internal tools, systems, and services. So a dedicated team that can help you to provide that service for you. Finally, we have teams of experienced the professional services, and a network of AWS partners with deep expertise in database applications, migrations, and some partners who specialized in helping customers navigating through sometimes complex migrations and even licensing assessment aspects. So in short, whatever your preference is, you can either do it yourself, do it with a partner, or have AWS do it for you. We can help you to migrate and modernize your database applications for you. I gathered you some more information, useful information about the general website of RDS. And the second one is a very nice matrix of SQL on AWS option. So it provides you all the 3 options that you can choose and pick from, and gives you what is available and what is not even available in each of those options. The other 2 links here is the technical documentation and the blog framework. The way that we operate in AWS is that we provide you the technical documentation that has all the ins and outs and attributes and explanations on how to do stuff. But we also provide you a blog that is written by a specialist within the company who is very vetted, and the process of having a blog is a very serious one. And this provides you a handful of how-tos, step-by-step guides, and a lot of very, very good field-oriented information where you can learn and employ the different services and options that we can provide you based on our services. Last but not least, a developer forum. It's directly oriented for SQL Server, where you can ask questions and people from AWS will be able to pick it up and give you guidance and help and answer questions. So we have reached the end. I thank you very much for your attendance, and you have here my contact details. So it's the QR code for my LinkedIn and my email. Feel free to contact me offline and let me know if you have any questions. And I hope you find this session informative, and I wish you a very nice day. And I think we can open up for questions, which I didn't see if there were any in the chats. So let's begin.
So we have one from Lars Rasmussen. Does RDS custom allow SQL agent jobs with the operating system CMD exec subsystem? So
I haven't checked that myself, if I'm frank, but I would imagine it does. I would imagine it does, and I will write myself and I will let you guys later exactly to make sure. I think the reason why I believe it does, it's because you are being given a full access to the underlying OS, and you have the ability to actually to exercise everything at your disposal. So things like extended store procedures, which are not available in RDS, is available on SQL Server and such. But I will definitely note myself to check that for you.
So you can run like XP command shell from SQL. Well, then it does make sense that you could do CMD exec from agent as well.
Yeah, exactly. Also, as I didn't mention it here, but the various of BI suite options, so SSIS, SSRS, and SSIS, are available both on RDS with some limitations. Naturally, full options in RDS Custom and on the self-managed on EC2.
I have a question myself, which is about running workloads in containers, let's say Kubernetes or OpenShift, or just running a standalone container somehow, running SQL in that. Which offerings would you have in AWS for running SQL in containers? Where would it be a good fit, basically?
It is an option, and we are, just as we speak, I know of a team that is currently writing some documentations and guidance exactly about that. It is relevant, though not for the managed service. It would be relevant mainly for the SQL on EC2 options. So there is an option for that, and I will be happy to provide you more information. I'm just writing myself all the notes to make sure I'm not forgetting anything.
Yeah. In the meantime, Vikas has a question. Can we restore an RDS backup on an EC2 SQL server? So take a database backup from RDS and restore it on an EC2.
So the answer is yes. When you do use a native SQL Server backup functionality for RDS, it will seamlessly upload it to S3. S3 is our object storage service. And from then, you simply have the back file and it's at your disposal, and you have the ability to do pretty much whatever you see fit, either download it to your local machines, restore it to another SQL on EC2 box, etc.
Yeah, and I guess if you use SQL Server 2022 on EC2, you'd even have restore from URL using an S3 bucket as the which is new in SQL 2022, that you can do backup from URL or restore from URL and use an S3 as the source.
That is entirely correct. As of SQL Server 2022, Microsoft finally acknowledged S3 as a valuable candidate to be able to directly perform backup natively into the bucket. Up until now, we had to do a little bit of a workaround in order to make it happen. But from SQL 22, we have that ability to directly backup to from the URL itself.
Yeah. Lars has another question. How do you decide when to make CU patches available on RDS and RDS Custom?
Okay, Lars, it's a great question. So naturally, you can imagine that the AWS RDS platform provides service for numerous of customers. So we need to make sure that those CUs are up to date. We are always striving to be as updated as possible, but we are always a few CUs behind because we are fully vetting it and regression testing it and making sure that they are okay. And we also don't want to get into the point where potentially Microsoft will recall the CU like it had done several times in the past. So we are always making sure to be a little bit behind in order to be sure that the CU is fully up to date. And when you are modifying the RDS instance, you have the ability to pick and choose from the CU that is currently available, and we periodically update that list. In addition, you have also the ability to choose automatic minor updates on the RDS, which will mean that RDS will do automatic CU updates on your behalf during the maintenance window of your choosing. You can, of course, disable it if you want to have the control of doing it yourself, but you can also automate that if you wish so.
Lars says, thank you for being behind on CUs due to the withdrawals, and I guess also due to I guess the modern method of system development is always roll forward. So if you introduce a bug in a CU, you release another CU, and they will of course contain bugs, even if Microsoft will of course try to not introduce bugs, but mistakes will happen.
Yeah, it's naturally, we're talking about software development. This is usually how it is. Yeah. I'm writing you here in the chat the general documentation route of the documentation, and you can see that for SQL Server 19 we are currently, the latest is CU 16, and if I'm checking briefly, the latest is CU 19. So we are well relatively almost up to date. Not the most up to date, but pretty up to date.
Exactly. So, but then let's say the RTM version for SQL 2022 contains a few bugs. So the CU1 will fix a lot of things. So it's a little bit of both. Being behind, if you know that there's a bug, you really want that CU applied as well. So, but it's good that you're regression testing it properly before just slapping it on. So.
Yeah. At the moment, SQL Server 2022 is available only for the self-managed SQL on EC2. So we provide you images that contain already the latest version of SQL 22. It's not yet certified and publicly available for RDS.
Okay. Do you know when it will come?
As it's a recorded session, it's a little bit problematic for us to place commitments. So we are working on it.
As soon as you can. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's I think SQL Server 2022, I would probably run it with the RTM as soon as it came out, but knowing that there's going to be limitation, there's going to be a few bugs, especially in the new areas of intelligent query processing. So I would be ready to maybe switch some of those options off because they're new.
Yeah, well, the CU1 for 2022 was issued already, so I'm sure it comes with a handful of bug fixes and
Yeah,
interesting.
and pretty important ones. I read through the CU list. I only run SQL 2022 in test environments yet, but there were a few quite important bug fixes in the CU1, and I'm sure there will be more because there was so many new functionalities and not just fixes for old ones. So introduced here.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for coming. I don't see any more questions in the chat. So, but we did get some pretty good questions. So thanks for that, everyone. Thanks for an interactive session. And thank you, Roni, for doing your debut on SQL Friday. I'm happy to have you on.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I wish you all a very pleasant weekend.
And you.